All right, welcome back to another episode of Audience Bridge Insights. And today I have Jesse Watkins, the co-founder of Who Sponsors Stuff and the newsletter conference or the newsletter events company. Not sure which one's the company. Jesse, nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Can you go and just give us a quick version of what got you into the newsletter world and what you're trying to solve with Who Sponsors Stuff and these conferences you guys are kicking off or you've been doing for the last couple of years?
Yeah, sure. So my background was actually in print media. I was doing ad sales for these little digest-sized publications in like the pregnancy and pediatric spaces. So lots of knowledge there. I had joined a company called The Ladders. It was a job site. My co-founder, Ian Sager, he was already there. He had built what was called Ladders News. His background was big media, the Journal, the magazine. He had built Ladders News. I went to monetize Ladders News. We used a newsletter as our primary distribution channel, driving traffic to the site and the link roundup. And to me, it just seemed like selling adjacent content, kind of, not far off from print. And we just crushed it on ad sales on that Ladders newsletter. We ended up scaling Ladders News to like a multi-million-dollar revenue driver annually. Had left there. And then Ryan and I were talking. Like 1440 and a bunch of brands were reaching out. This was COVID 2020. So Ryan and I started doing some outside sales for a lot of these pubs. Something I'd always done to find sponsors and prospect sponsors is subscribe to a bunch of different newsletters in whatever verticals I'm selling into. When we were doing outside sales, that just wasn't cutting it, like the scale of clients we were taking on, the different verticals they were in. So Ryan came up with a system to kind of automate some of that. And what started as like an internal prospecting tool grew into what is now Who Sponsors Stuff, tracking somewhere around 800 different newsletters. I believe we have tell you exactly how many, over 10,700 unique sponsors in the database. And then in promoting Who Sponsors Stuff, just realized there wasn't an event space for newsletters. So that's how we started a dinner series called Dine and Deliver with Dan Oshinsky of Inbox Collective. That was a hit. We're now on year 3 of the dinner series and, use that audience to build up the newsletter conference. And then we have additional in-person events coming up. Like we have the Business of Local Media conference coming up in October in Salt Lake.
Is that local media? Is it based on just the newsletters specifically, or is it getting more into like the actual local events and stuff like that?
Everything, yeah, it's media. This isn't a newsletter specific build, so kind of the full scope of these local builds. And our take on that is really like the business of this space. Blue Engine Collaborative came to us after the second year of the newsletter conference, wanting us to spin something up for local media, kind of with that same perspective or point of view on like a profitable or revenue driven business. And so much of local is like, grant driven or really struggling to keep the lights on right now. So we think learnings and lessons could help save a lot of that space.
Cool. As far as Who Sponsors Stuff, what's some surprising insights you found out for the 10,000 plus newsletters you're monitoring and all the advertisers?
Yeah, I think it gives us a pretty good view. I mean, I could argue we have like one of the best views of sponsorship generally in the newsletter space specifically. So the types of sponsors, the types of deals as well, you get some insight into. In the COVID era, or a lot of ad spend freezes, and then the explosion of like performance models. Those seem to have a lot more stickiness than I would have argued. If you told me that in 2019, all of newsletter would go strictly performance, I probably would have argued otherwise. So just a lot of those insights, and also the types of new newsletters. We're always like looking for new newsletters. We saw that trend from Web3 to NFT to AI to crypto, now back to AI and some of these newsletter builds.
So are you seeing like the bigger brands, bigger traditional brands out there, Nike or some other CPG brands, are they starting to advertise more or invest more on newsletter ads, or is it still kind of more focused on that performance based kind of network of advertisers?
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons. I think a lot of the blue chip brands don't necessarily spend a ton on newsletter, or it's not like a priority. One, just the way the industry developed, we sort of run independent of the big buying, selling agencies, right? Like it's not, I mean, sure, at Ladders, I would get an RFP from some of the agencies, but newsletters, we had a ton of scale, right? Like it was a very large audience and a bit of brand recognition from Mark's news appearances. Outside of like front office sports or those brands could get, or like the Gist could get some of these like more CPG blue chip partnerships tied into social or like multi channel, newsletter specific channel, lots of different B2B sponsors. I mean, now you're seeing the maturity of like the AI brands that were raising or now have like really solid B2B products. So we see a lot of that and a lot more like smaller brands than the large blue chip CPG brands.
When it comes to, getting the news kicked off or started, like when should you start monetizing it?
Yeah, I think right away. We were at an event in Austin. It was the Newsletter Marketing Summit, and Andy Meckison, he's the co-founder of The Assist. He gave a really, really detailed, like, on how they're monetizing their Welcome series, right? Through some quizzes and some offerings, and it gives them some data and some opportunities to sell products, some of which they're getting affiliate on, sell courses, etc. I think when we think of newsletter monetization, as soon as you have an audience that's following you regularly, you're sending on a regular schedule, there's different ways to monetize. Not always directly with sponsorships out the gate, but there are ways to monetize right away.
And that comes into like the Beehive boosts or Spark Loops boosts or whatever, trying to get them on like a kind of a co-reg sign up and monetizing them in the welcome flow. What's the biggest mistake you see that operators are doing when they're trying to sell ads?
Yeah, I think so. The way I always think about newsletter sponsorship is you have to, or media sales in general, but it's very true for newsletter media sellers. You're kind of a brand steward for whatever your sponsors are, right? The way it works is you're lending the voice, the publisher is lending their voice to this sponsor to speak to an audience that they should hold in high regard. I think it's important to make sure that there's like strong fits there. So just being like honest in about like open rates and size and like audience demos. Will always lead to better successful sponsorship partnerships over the longer term. I also think like bundling, like don't discount the audience. Like a lot of sellers will try to sell one-offs or just smaller swaps, and as well as like having a clearly defined ad product. Sorry, this is a little all over the place, but like I think clearly defined ad product is also like a mistake a lot of early newsletter operators will make on the sponsorship front.
And then as far as like what's the most important metric for the sponsor, the advertiser, is it still the acquisition in the end, more, direct response, conversion, lead gen, or are you seeing, more to the brand development?
Yeah. So, I mean, it depends on the sponsor, the publisher, but generally, I mean, right, any advertisement we have a lot of like DR in the newsletter space. And the way when I'm selling a sponsorship, this is why I'm going to be open about like my opens, the type of audience I have, and click throughs matter a lot here too, because then that marketing director is going to look at all of that and say, okay, we could anticipate X conversion percentage based on this demographic info and the traffic you're sending us, whether that conversion is purchase, lead gen, whatever it is. That's kind of what matters. So ultimately, like sending traffic to the advertiser, I think is what matters most.
Got it. Now, getting into some of the ad networks and tools that are out there to help you monetize. You've touched on a couple, but what are your thoughts on the Beehive ad network that they have implemented into their ESP?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Tyler spends a lot of time going at Nathan over at Kit when, in a lot of ways, they're not as comparable as Beehive is to like a Substack, right? And I think Beehive's kind of like the anti-Substack on that front. Monetization up front, monetization through sponsorships. Look, the data they release on that network, the average ad rates, the scale, the placements, it's great. If you don't have a large newsletter or an ad sales team, it could probably I think they view it as a kind of a retention tool, right? Hey, it's paying for my monthly Beehive subscription. Some brands might get a little bit more scale out of it than that, but at that level, it works well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think long term, as it grows and they mature and they get larger and larger publishers or people growing their newsletters, it's also the buying power. You would think they have leverage to distribute across a bunch of, you know, the channel of all their newsletters for the bigger buys. That's the hard thing for some people to get bigger brands, right? If they don't have big enough audience. So if you don't have a couple million, they might not be interested. This is more like, I guess, the consumer side. B2B is a lot
Yeah.
smaller, a lot nichier. But for consumer brands, they're not interested on sending some for like 50,000 people.
Well, I think that's also like a little bit of a trap with any ad network, right? It's adverse selection. The brands that can't like the publishers that can't monetize directly, or that struggle to monetize directly, and I mean, I talk to a lot of these publishers through the dinners and through who sponsor stuff. I can't tell you how many times somebody says like, "Oh, I wish I could just plug and play for revenue." And it always gets me a little heated because there is no plug and play for revenue, right? It's like a full concerted effort, like on so many different fronts. So when you're looking at ad networks at scale, and I want to scoop up a bunch of 10K, 50K audiences that have difficulty monetizing, there's a few struggles. I think one, for the sponsor voice, as I said earlier, one of the things that's kind of special about newsletter sponsorship is that voice. People read a newsletter. The voice of the publisher is really important here. So lending that voice to the sponsor, I think at scale gets a little bit more difficult across. And again, even consumer, I think it's difficult. And then also performance across that big of a scale, right? Like across that wide of a net, what does my performance look like? Or could I get these people directly or someplace else?
Yeah, I can see that issue. I mean, you see it all the time. Just well, for a couple of things. One, with their ad network, you can't change the copy, right? So it's in there, whatever the ad is, it is. And then when you're looking at, the big problem over the years, especially in the affiliate space, is all the fingerprinting, right? All the ad copy and everything's getting fingerprinted, so that could cause issues deliverability wise. So if they're sending it out to, a bajillion different newsletters in their ecosystem, I could see that possibly causing some issues. I do see what people like 6 a.m. City, Ryan Heffy over there, or like the Flyover, for example, how they're expanding their advertisers. They want to see more subscribers if they want to keep on scaling and stuff, but it's still the same voice, right? Flyover, they have state level ones, but still their voice representing states, and they have a national brand, but they can kind of use that to increase the distribution for them. And same thing with 6am City and all their local sites. They're all similar, and they keep their voice pretty similar, so they're able to scale that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Voice definitely matters a lot for skill.
Yeah. What about the types of tools and networks like Wellput that have gotten to the space?
Yeah. Again, a lot of when we were building out who sponsors stuff, a lot of people would push us towards an ad network. They would say, what about like a two-sided marketplace? And we were very intentional about not building out a two-sided marketplace. Never, for a bunch of reasons. One, we never would have been able to scale revenue the way we did at the ladders without owning all of that inventory, the ability to spin up new ad products, make goods, just so many things dealing directly. I could carve out different audiences. With ad networks, you can't do any of that really, right? I think a well put or a paved or those types of tools, they have utility again for brands that want to use that as backfill. I think is always good. I had several ad networks as backfill at ladders that you could rotate in and out depending on the need, the spend, whatever it is. And then smaller brands that are just beginning to test out sponsorships to kind of see what their audience in the consumer space, to see what type of advertisers their audience resonates with and what type of traffic they're sending to these advertisers. So again, like kind of that resonance piece. Yeah, just testing out if advertising is like a good sponsorship model for them.
Cool. I was going to ask you about what factors should you consider before joining a network for Sound Direct, but I think you've been kind of hammering that this whole
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of dealing directly versus ad networks. Generally, like any kind of agency or ad network, they have their utility in place, but they're not always a necessary middleman. So when scaling revenue, there's a lot of different tools you have to use and figure out. But ultimately, the brands that are going to win the most are the brands that are like own their own revenue the most.
When people are trying to price their newsletters and their ad inventory, their products, what's the best method to use? Is it a flat rate, CPM, CPC, CPA? Well, obviously CPA. I mean, that's more affiliate. That's always a tough one. But what's the best way you think?
Yeah. So obviously we always want flat fee. My take on this is that, and I'll get to like how we could figure out a starting point for that flat fee, like where it should be, where it'll fall in line with the other like pricing options. The reason I like flat fee is purely like risk assumption. I think any kind of pure affiliate or a commission-based sponsorship without any sort of like guaranteed amount is backwards risk assumption, right? If you started a newsletter, you put money, sweat equity, there's a lot into building and scaling that audience. And I don't necessarily think advertisers should just get to access that for free, right? So that's why I'm kind of a fan of flat fee. I think it's like a more fair pricing model for brands. Um, and I think that's a good counter to the whole, oh, well, if it performs on an affiliate basis, then we could test out something else later. Well, you built the audience already, right? So there was that work
Right.
already done. One of the ways to get to flat fee, like where you should start at, right? For a consumer brand, most advertisers are, as I explained earlier, I'll explain my audience, my opens, my click throughs, my anticipated click throughs, and then they'll take a look at that and say like, okay, based on this audience demographic and these click-throughs and this traffic, this is our anticipated conversion, whatever that KPI is, right? As an ad seller, you should be having these conversations. Like you should be well aware of what those KPIs are and what they're trying to achieve through the sponsorship. So a good way to determine what that flat fee should be is to price off of the amount of traffic you're sending to the advertiser. So I know for like most low level like CPG consumer brands, like some kind of like e-com watch brand or something like that, they're going to be looking to run these campaigns somewhere between $1 and maybe $4 on a cost per click basis, right? So you probably want to take your anticipated or actual ad click through numbers. So I know if I'm sending 1,000 individuals in traffic, okay, cool. Maybe I want to present this flat fee as 3K, right? And then bundle and discount off of there. But yeah.
Cool. So just so the people that aren't, they're more newbies in the ad and monetization space. When we're talking about click through rates and stuff for the advertiser, are you talking about the overall click through rate of the newsletter or per ad spot? I think people get
Apologies.
confused about that because they'll think like, oh, my click through rate's 3.5%, but then their ad spot's like 0.5%.
No, I mean, I use click to opens on the ad, like on the ad assets, right? Now, that's not to say, like, when I was at Ladders, the overall click through rate on the newsletter could help paint a picture of how engaged your audience is with your content. But for the advertiser, the only thing that matters really is like that ad click through or click to open.
Right. Yeah. If you give them the overall click through rate, they're doing their projections like you were saying on 10,000 clicks, not 1,000. So, um, how should these newer newsletters or smaller brands pitch a sponsor, you know, if they have a small list size, but they have, really good engagement?
Yeah. So it depends on vertical again. Like I think in B2B, like the key is niching down. There's a lot of really, really strong B2B sponsors in the newsletter space. We see growth every day. We see a lot of B2B sponsors entering the space. So niching down and being specific about your audience and what they're interested in. On the consumer front, if you have highly engaged small audience, again, it's finding like that kind of like that magic mix of like what is important to that audience, right? And how can the sponsor access that audience through you in a way that they can't otherwhere in other places?
Got it. You've mentioned bundling ads in your inventory a few times. Can you give advice on how to bundle the ad units, frequency, how many times it's going out, or how does that look?
Yeah. So when I started at the Ladders, like I wanted to fill inventory immediately, and we did. And part of it was like through just testing and bundling. One of the reasons you want to bundle is because, I mean, there's many reasons. One of which is one run isn't a test of anything. It could be a bad deliverability day. It could be a bad open day, just an off send. Sponsor wasn't sticky enough. You only have one shot at sponsor copy, right? I mean, you could A/B, but you're still only getting one shot at each individual with that copy. So I think that's why I always encourage minimum like a three run by to start, and then pacing. It depends on how many times you're sending. If you're a daily newsletter, the way I always thought of it is if you're sending. I mean, at Ladders we had 7 days of inventory on just the daily product. Nowadays, a lot of pubs will have like 5 days of inventory, right, Monday through Friday. One way to look at that and filling that calendar is to say, okay, I have weekly sponsors, I have bi-weekly sponsors, I have monthly sponsors. So you kind of want to test that frequency. And so there are brands you could run once a week without seeing any fatigue on the performance for that sponsor, right? The only way to find that out is to test, right? So maybe I want to run, one today, the 20th, and then one like next Wednesday, right? And then give a week to breathe, test some different ad copy, run another one, and then take a look at all that performance. So it's always to the publisher's advantage and the sponsor's advantage to do these bundled or several run buys. One of the ways to like push an advertiser towards that is to discount. It's always better for you as well because that's how you get your inventory fill, figure out what sponsors are working, figure out the frequency, and that's how you get to your quarterly deals or your 6-month deals with sponsors. So just heavily discount those first bundled sends.
And the sponsorships when you're doing, are you more the philosophy of like one feature sponsor for the entire newsletter, or having multiple sponsors throughout a newsletter, different placements on a newsletter? Like where do you lie?
Yeah. So I'm kind of old school. I'm like do the basics well first, especially if like new like people that are starting out in the newsletter space or starting out in their monetization journey or newsletter journey here. Do the basics well first. Like if you can't fill daily inventory in a primary logo sponsorship slot, we don't have to think about additional inventory, right? Or creating new ad products or more than that. So do the basics first well. Logo sponsorships, simple, works well. Logo up top, second or third piece of native content, hero image if your newsletter has that. If not, just copy. Again, like it seems native. Your click throughs. 1440 does a ton of A/B testing on all of this stuff, down to how many, and they could all click through to the same landing page, but like where are we putting these link outs? How many are we putting? How many placements is this sponsor going to appear in the newsletter? But yeah, generally I think do the logo sponsorships first, fill your inventory, and then start thinking of additional ad inventory. And that doesn't always necessarily mean more ad inventory on your primary newsletter. You could always spin up an additional product with sponsors already in mind. We did a lot of that at Ladders.
Yeah, did you guys ever spin up a new newsletter,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
because
we
of a
did.
sponsor's request?
Yeah. So and Ryan was great. I knew we'd go into business together pretty quickly because for an editorial guy, he was like very revenue focused and he just got it. Once I was able to sell, he would just blow up my Slack at all times with just like, hey man, you should see if, for example, like it was Morning Brew was working with us. And he was like, "Oh, like tomorrow's International Coffee Day or something, right? Like, why don't we spin up a newsletter on coffee, and then like we'll see if Morning Brew wants to sponsor it as like start your day with Morning Brew, and then it's all like these coffee and career workplace like adjacent content, right?" So I just called them and right on the phone was like, "Yeah, let's do that." So did it, right? That's how we spun up. We had dedicated email products, and our dedicated email products were selling at like 10x my daily rates, right? So, but again, wouldn't have been able to do all that if I didn't fill all the inventory on the daily first and see the sponsors and also own those relationships with the sponsors. You don't necessarily get to do that through ad networks.
Awesome. Let's change gears here and let's talk about the events, newsletter events company, and what's going on over there. What inspired you? I think you might have touched this in the beginning, but what inspired you to start these live events?
Yeah. So Ryan and I were speaking at a conference in 2022, still kind of COVID era, and it was a very large conference. And there wasn't a soul there that I could talk shop with, really, like just newsletter, business, kind of revenue conversation. A few contacts that I knew, but I didn't meet anybody new that was really like they weren't talking about newsletters from like a revenue driven perspective at all. So we out of frustration, realize there is a need for this. The newsletter space is mature enough. Like there was no Morning Brew representation, no Skim representation, and this was a large online news conference. So we reached out to Dan Oshinsky of Inbox Collective, and we reached out to Louis over at Sparkloop. Louis actually sponsored our first Dine and Deliver dinner. We did it in New York. And about 20, 26 people, I think the first one was November of 22. And the way the dinner series works is we just get between 20 and 30 operators in a room for one uh, off the record, private, curated discussion. They're a sponsored product, but they work really well just for like industry discussion. They're not like ad sale pitches at all. It's pure industry discussion. You get to hear a lot of really great takes, a lot of great vulnerabilities, and it being off the record, I think is really cool too. And that had scaled. people apply to attend that. We launched that with the intention, like the dinners were our full intention was to get to conference. After a year and a half of dinners, that list was somewhere around 700 inbound applicants. I mean, now that's in the thousands, and we knew we had enough of an audience to go to market with for the newsletter conference.
Are those dinner series free to attend? The sponsor covers the cost of the dinner for everyone.
Yep, they're sponsored. Like this year, we had Omida's our title sponsor, and then we have additional supporting sponsorship. With like we might have six to eight supporting sponsors on it this year as well.
Cool. What role do you see the in-person connection playing for the newsletter people that are going to these conferences?
Yeah. I'd like to say Ryan and I were early-ish in this newsletter kind of swing, right? Like the 2018 to 2020 kind of newsletter push. And I'd like to think we're kind of early on the in-person kind of thing as well. I think part of it was COVID, but not all of it. Also, is as we enter this new AI era on so many different fronts, I think there's a real want for in-person connections, especially in the B2B space. People were happy. I mean, the first newsletter conference we oversold, we had over 400 attendees. It was people were happy to be out networking. And same with the dinners. We'll frequently get messages of like, hey, I'm so glad I went because I got to meet so and so who now I talk to on a regular basis. So I think that we're still kind of early in this wave of like in-person events. And I also think events are going to be a huge revenue stream for a lot of media companies as they are becoming now and as time goes on.
Yeah, they're great. I went to the first two, so I definitely enjoy them and the dinner beforehand. Going to the back to scaling and sustaining your ad revenue for the newsletter publishers. How do the top tier newsletters keep monetization strong without sacrificing the health or quality of their lists, not burning them out?
Yeah. So again, you mean like as far as like my stable of advertisers, like how do I get them to run over
Yeah,
time?
well, I guess a couple of things like how to not be too ad heavy to turn off your subscribers, and then how to um not burn out the advertiser. Like usually we're talking about bundles, frequencies, all that stuff. Like you don't want the obviously we can do change of creatives and stuff like that to mix it up, but you don't get that you know burnout or like where you don't see the ads anymore, just blind to whatever because you're so used to that spot being there and you're like, yeah, what I'm scroll right by.
Yeah. So like I refer to that as like fatigue, like how to delay fatigue. So I'll start with the audience side of it first. One of the things that we saw, especially when we were doing like the outside sales stuff in 2020 for a ton of different brands, a lot of these brands had different sub tiers that they would like subscription tiers that they were beginning. And something that became a little bit of a pattern I thought was not great was, hey, pay X dollars a month and you get the ad free version, right? And I think the problem there is that, as I've said a few times, like newsletter sponsorship, the way it works is like that voice. And if you know your audience and like your audience, it's your opportunity to platform a sponsorship or something that makes sense to them. They could, if it's in a B2B case, like it makes a ton of sense, right? Like these are tools that these people are going to be using as part of their jobs. Slam dunk. Nobody's going to be upset about that. Um, and personally, maybe because I'm a fan of kind of advertising generally, I mean, media, but especially advertising, like I like when I get a targeted ad that makes sense. Somebody's introducing me to something that I might want. So I think like the whole ad free audience burn is a bit overhyped. With that said, obviously, yeah, there are brands that have, if I have a newsletter that's like a consumer facing newsletter and I'm just filling it with 100 different affiliate placements that have no real tie into my audience. There's no real strong angle. It's off target, right? That's where that misalignment happens is where the friction and the fatigue can happen there on the audience side of things. So the more aligned you are with your content, your advertisers, and your audience, the audience really doesn't have a ton to complain about there as far as sponsorships goes.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that the biggest issue is the newsletter operator want for revenue and just taking anything they get, and not being patient and selective with what they're providing. And as soon as you put up some spammy garbage on there, and some direct response, call it the foot with the big word on it or something that could
Yeah.
really do damage to your brand. So,
Yeah, Ryan and I, so at Ladder is like my main, when I had started there, he was like, just make it so I don't have to put in these live intent like foot fungus ads, right? Like those little banner kind of things, exactly as you described. And then fatigue on the other side of it is trial and error, right? Um, and just never being complacent with your current stable of advertisers. You always do have to be prospecting for more advertisers and constantly trying to fill revenue. One of the ways to do that is getting out ahead of it, right? Like start, where you start booking. If I'm starting from zero, I want to fill the month as quickly as possible. And then I want to start thinking of like, okay, I want to start filling multiple months. I want to start filling a quarter at a time. And then I want to be 6 months ahead of it is kind of like the real goal. If you get a year out ahead, amazing. I've never been there, but yeah.
so outside of focusing on filling up your primary sponsorship and making that uh, your primary goal and your primary revenue stream, are there any other signals that you would use to show that you're ready to scale up or add opportunities, units, whatever you know?
Yeah. I mean, once you're out of inventory, right? Once all my inventory is full, I know there's a few options. You could push rates up, but you don't ever want to like price yourself out of market. That and raising rates doesn't always make sense, right? It could be running as it should be. So I think you have the option to either raise your rates, which you should be doing, but not to extremes to cover the revenue gaps that could be filled with either additional inventory, whether that's a secondary placement, tertiary placements, or new newsletters specifically designed to drive sponsorship revenue.
So, as far as I think it's actually a good thing to ask. As far as raising rates and stuff for people, how often should the publisher be looking to increase their rates? Like look at it like obviously audience size goes from 100,000 to 200,000. I mean, you have double the audience, so you better be raising your rates. And then with that being said, how far in advance are you comfortable pre-selling to, knowing that you do have this growth? And if say you book it, you're trying to ramp up, double your size by the end of the year. If you're booking a whole year in advance, knowing that you're going to be at whatever volume towards the end of the year, halfway through the year, but you sold stuff in the beginning for the whole year. How do you take all that into account for selling?
Yeah. So I think there are brands that I've sold for that would send me monthly media kits with pricing increases. And it's a lot, right? Like to deal with, to talk to a sponsor and have them like, wait, this is what it was like 2 weeks ago, man. Like, come on. So I'm opposed to like that kind of like monthly raises. Even quarterly to me is a bit off. Look, if you're going from 100K to 200K in that short of a span of time and maintaining your open rates and engagement, you have probably some money and muscle behind that build, right? If you're doing that in a matter of weeks or just like a month or two.
Yep.
So if that's the case, again, I'm probably looking for like stability and inventory fill to me are like essential. So I want to make sure my inventory is filled with sponsors. If you are in that rapid of a growth phase and you know you're in that rapid of a growth phase, I wouldn't go beyond selling quarterly. But look, if somebody came to me for a year sponsorship when I'm at 100K audience and we agree on rate, and then all of a sudden at the end of that year I'm at 500K, like they were an early adopter to this. So I don't see that as a negative, and you could grow with those sponsors too, right? But generally, yeah.
What's your thought on like pre-buys on future growth? I believe, who was I talking to? Ryan Heffy. I think he's been able to in the past, I think, launch into new markets, but with like sponsors built in already, and they know the growth plan of what's happening, and they're going and they do it and they launch like that, but they have some pre-built in sponsors which helps them pay for the subscriber acquisition in that market to go, and they're getting they're getting all the sponsorships spots already lined up. What do you think about that strategy?
Yeah, I mean that works. One, he has a lot of right. Ryan has a lot of data. Like they've done this in so many markets.
Right.
So at this point, he kind of knows like the anticipated growth for each market, and they're also testing markets like aggressively before launching in a market. So they're testing all that out beforehand. But in a lot of ways, that's not too different from spinning up a new ad product and telling a sponsor to take a gamble on it with you. It comes down to owning those relationships and having really good relationships.
So there's been a lot of hype here. I think we touched base earlier, not on on this podcast, but the whole headline that came out about Pearson and Newsett and her about selling her advertising, saying her list is one size, but really only sending to a certain size. I come more focused on the deliverability aspect of email, so I understand what list size are, what sending sizes are, and all this stuff. But it's been getting out there quite a bit in the headlines. What's your thoughts on that whole situation?
Yeah, it's funny that when I guess it was the two pieces that dropped, Insider and Forbes dropped one, and now there's probably a few more. None of it was surprising to me, to be honest. Like I think a lot of people that kind of knew the Newsette and like the revenue numbers they would boast seemed a little fishy, given like what you would see on, I don't know, like what you would anticipate that scale actually was. It's never great to overstate your audience size, right? Like that's not to anybody's advantage. I think it's important to have integrity when dealing with sponsors for a lot of reasons because it just doesn't necessarily like it's not you end up burning yourself in the end, right? If I say, "Oh, I'm sending to over 1 million subs, 300K of which are like that's my actual audience size," like you know, I would like to see like what which percent is like what was presented as like your click to opens up against that over 1 million audience, right? Or was it up against the 300K that you're sending to? At the ladders I started there, my audience size was over 4 million. Like our sending, like we were sending to that many, but open rates were low. This was like anywhere from like 14 to 18% on opens. Eventually, we reduced that list size and got those opens up. There, it worked though because I was pretty upfront about it and the way that audience was cycled through and the way we were sending. It could be unique openers any day of the week, just the way that audience was built. In the Newsnet's case, a little bit different, sort of like a bad faith argument there of like, oh, well, we have over 1 million subs, but really only 300K subs.
Yeah, I mean, when you're selling a flat fee or CPM base, it's definitely a bit. It's not definitely not something we want to do because it's got a line, but that comes back to like, are they rebuying? Are they booking again? Because if it's not performing, I don't know enough about the advertisers and what they had going on. I'm assuming a lot of it was branded stuff because of their exposure that they had. I don't know if they were doing a lot more brands that they didn't know the performance necessarily on it. I don't know. Or was it the normal direct response people and just wasn't backing out and they just kept on getting new advertisements? I can't imagine you keep on advertising on something at such a large list size and you're not getting enough traction from it.
I mean, I remember. I mean, I thought the news that was like largely sort of. It was like women's culture interest, right, and like fashion. So I thought it was a lot of like that type of DR stuff. So maybe they don't notice. Maybe it's just like low conversions, and that's where it happens. But yeah, eventually it's gotta catch up to you. If I'm paying for 1 million and I'm only seeing click throughs or site traffic from an audience that's significantly less than that, right? If the numbers don't add up, then yeah, it's got to catch up to you.
And then, I mean, this doesn't necessarily help, especially in the mainstream. Does the newsletter space have a trust problem with their inventory?
I don't think so. I mean, look, there are bad actors all over the place. I don't know. I think generally the brands, like reputable, scaled brands, a lot of what Ryan and I deal with are more legacy media institutions and then like established, like already established and scaled independent media brands. So for them, that's not really an issue. Maybe they scaled to that point where they were working with advertisers from the beginning till now, and it's not really an issue. Maybe on some of the ad networks, I could see that possibly with some like kind of bot stuff, but again, easy to catch and easy to fix.
Are you seeing, I guess it's probably easier now. I mean, back in the day, which I think caused such a lag in the newsletter space, was all the local newsletters, newspapers, and newspapers in general selling the online and the newsletter as like a freebie on the advertising to the print, which for other advertisers, I'm sure, especially like for local newsletter brands, they probably have a bigger challenge getting advertisers now. Well, it might be easier now than it was before, but I know in the beginning it was super hard because they were just like, "What are you talking about? I get a free thing on the Palm Beach Post or the Sun Sentinel." Do you think we've gotten past that, or is that still kind of thing over our shoulder, looking around.
So that conference that I spoke about, that was like the reason, sort of that spark that we started the events business. The Wall Street Journal gave a panel about like their newsletter program, and they did it was a pretty deep dive. But after that panel, I went up to them and I started a discussion kind of around that, right? Like, okay, so what metrics matter on X? Like this one doesn't drive revenue. This doesn't do this. Like, Alex Lieberman started Morning Brew in a college dorm room and got a multi-million dollar exit, right? Like, so if I took any one of those Wall Street Journal audiences in like a 20K clip, and then I started building a media company around just that 20K audience, it would follow that I'd have a pretty valuable media company. And I think for the legacy brands, the way that they viewed it was like, okay, there's more than just revenue on the newsletter builds. They fit into the overall media infrastructure there in a way that's a little bit different from our world of like pure newsletter first kind of brands. With that said, now you'll see legacy brands, and some of which Brian and I do some consulting for, will come to us and say like, hey, we need to figure out how to do this now, right? Like Morning Brew, Skin, like all these brands that figured out newsletter and drove real media brands. Now they're multimedia brands, right? Morning Brew has an events business that's scaling really well, all the B2B verticals. And that started as the Skim for finance bros, right? So now the legacy brands are realizing like, oh, we have to catch up on newsletter. Like, how do we get there? So I think now we are getting to an era where newsletter will see it sounds weird to say like its rightful place in like revenue strategies, but
Right.
yeah, I think there was a lot of reasons it was. And then just a side note, like for anybody that has like any multimedia stuff and newsletters a part of your offerings, just don't ever like always apply a rate to it. Don't ever offer anything free added value. It just diminishes its value immediately.
What excites you most about where newsletter monetization is heading?
Yeah. Generally, I think for newsletters, I'm excited as these brands, like as newsletter first brands begin to become more than just newsletter brands, I think is really exciting. And how newsletters fit into creator builds is like adjacent that as well. I think on the revenue front, diversification is like what's really exciting outside of just sponsorships. Obviously, who sponsor stuff is big on sponsorships. You should be pursuing revenue outside of just pure sponsorships, stuff like events, webinars on again on like the B2B front, but on the consumer front, events could drive a lot. Yeah, so I'm excited of like the diversification and the continued maturity of the space. We've come a long way from 2018 till now.
And what's your thoughts on the subscription model?
Yeah, also solid, right? Like it's I like sponsorship models because I like the idea of being able to educate people or like give them the content they want. Subscription models work really well for a lot of B2B pubs and some consumer pubs. I subscribe to a few creators that I'll follow for like a few philosophy blogs or and then obviously I'm subscribed to on the B2B side, like a media operator. Jacob Donnelly's build is phenomenal. But again, like if you look at AMO, Jacob Donnelly's build, like it's subscriptions, sponsorships, webinars, events. So yeah.
And do you see AI impacting sponsorships or advertising in the future?
Yeah. Uh, there's so many ways that AI has an impact on our space. I think one is AI search results could impact not publishers, one, but also probably has some impact on sponsors as well. So again, I think just being really clear about your audience. And I think as it's going to be really important to know your audience too, which is another side to like the in-person part of it and why that's great. The better you know your audience, the better you could pitch to an advertiser. And then as far as what could be utilized by AI or the benefits to AI there, probably for some like kind of A/B testing, copy testing, like maybe diving through some audience segments. But yeah,
Cool. I'm gonna go through a few rapid fire questions here. See what you got here. What's the most overhyped monetization tool?
most overhyped monetization tool, any kind of plug and play ad network is definitely like pure plug and play is definitely overhyped.
What's the most underrated monetization tactic?
Yeah. So grit, right? Like just that the kind of like huge effort. Like if there's a sponsor you think is a really good fit for your newsletter and you have a really good angle for it, like being kind of relentless at getting at that person. And you should know like everything about that branded campaign, but like really, really that sort of, you know, just keep knocking on doors mentality.
Got it. Favorite niche newsletter monetizing smartly?
I don't know. I mean, I would say I don't know if I could call like AMO niche. I think I like what he does with like the monetization. And like his subscription model is like really, really cool with the, the Slack, those kind of models. On the
Right.
indie news front, Mo News is really cool. I think he's doing a lot of cool things there too.
And right now, what's the most aggressive sponsor category?
B2B AI for sure. They're coming to maturity now. Like these brands finally have products that make a lot of sense for a lot of different B2B use cases.
And outside of AMO, because you've said them a couple times, what newsletter operator should everyone be watching?
Newsletter operator, everybody should be watching. Well, email intelligence, everybody should subscribe to, which is right in my newsletter.
There
Also
you
Dan
go.
Oshinsky. Uh, always, always plug Dan when I get a chance to plug Dan.
Nice.
And obviously Jacob, if you're not subscribed to AMO, I couldn't recommend that one enough.
Well, I think that was pretty good chat. I think we went over a lot of stuff. I think a lot of good, useful takeaways and insights on the monetization front with the newsletters and what's happening out there. Where can people go to find sponsors and sign up for your events? Give your little shtick there.
Yeah. So who sponsor stuff is just whosponsorstuff.com. For our newsletter events, we do have, I mean, I guess we own the domain, so I can kind of reveal we have like a media enthusiast domain we're probably going to build around for a lot of our events. So we have the Business of Local coming up in Salt Lake, October 19th through 21st. That's going to be about driving revenue in local media builds. I think the timing is really great for that and the need is really great for that. And then the newsletter conference next year will be May 8th, again at the Time Center in New York City.
Awesome. Well, if you're looking for a deliverability speaker at that conference, let me know. I think
Yeah.
I would. I think that's one thing that's missing from these newsletter conferences is a little insight into deliverability for the newbies, and even the experts. They don't know what they're doing half the time either.
Yeah. That whole space is way over my head. It's like voodoo adjacent to me. Like, do I have like the rituals before sending? Deliverability is way more complex than my brain can handle. So, yeah, we'll reach out.
Well, Jesse, thanks for coming on. Appreciate the talk. Hope it was good for you too, and we'll see you soon.
Excellent. Thanks so much for the time, Chris.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that episode of Audience Bridge Insights. If you did, go ahead and do me a solid. Click the subscribe button right around here. You can also subscribe to the newsletter. I have a link down in the description below. Now, we have a lot of amazing guests lined up, but until then, keep sending smart.